July 18th, 1997. A car sits alone near the cliffs of Point Cartwright. The driver? Nowhere to be found. The sun rises. The ocean churns below. But something is wrong. A trail of footprints leads toward the edge, but not back. Hours later, a body is discovered 40 meters down, broken against the jagged rocks. A tragic end. But was it really an accident? Or was this something much darker? Meaghan Louise Rose was 25 years old, full of life, a woman with a kind heart and an infectious energy, born and raised in Morwell, Victoria. She had recently moved to Queensland with her boyfriend, Keith Lees. She worked as a caregiver for the elderly and disabled, a job that suited her perfectly. She loved helping people, and everyone who knew her described her the same way. Bright, kind, always smiling. But in the months leading up to her death, something changed. Meaghan, who once called her sister Fiona, every day grew distant. The calls became shorter, more reserved, as if something was wrong, but she wasn't saying what. The night before she died, July 17th, 1997, Meaghan and Keith spent the evening at the Maroochydore RSL Club. By all accounts, it was a normal night. They drank, they talked, they went home. Keith later said that Meaghan was in good spirits, that she had a couple of drinks but wasn't overly intoxicated, that they returned home without incident. At 7:15 p.m., Keith said he made Meaghan a warm drink before stepping out of the room. When he returned at 8 p.m., she was gone, just vanished. At sunrise, a passerby spotted something at the bottom of Point Cartwright, a body, broken, motionless. At first, police ruled it a suicide. There was alcohol in her system, 0.148 blood alcohol content. A wine cask was found near her car. The case seemed clear-cut, a tragic, impulsive act. Just 1 year earlier, Keith had taken out a life insurance policy on Meaghan, over $200,000. There was a clause. If she died by suicide within 13 months, the money wouldn't be paid. But Meaghan died at 14 months. Her family didn't believe she had taken her own life. They knew her. They saw the signs of fear, the hesitation in her voice during those last calls. But without evidence, the case was closed. And Keith walked away a free man, and a much richer one. For over 2 decades, Meaghan's death remained a painful mystery. The whispers never stopped. The doubts never faded. And then, in 2022, cold case detectives took another look. What they found changed everything. In 2023, Queensland police officially reopened the case. The inconsistencies were too many to ignore. The autopsy was re-examined. Witnesses were re-interviewed. And within days of this news breaking, something strange happened. Keith Lees disappeared. His car was found near the Victorian coastline. His home? Empty. No trace of him anywhere. A man on the run. The search for Keith Lees. For months, authorities scoured the country. Who was helping him? How was he staying hidden? A $500,000 reward was announced for information leading to his arrest. And then, finally, a breakthrough. January 2025. A quiet suburb in Durrell, Sydney. After 27 years, police finally closed in. Keith Lees, now 72, is arrested at a home where he'd been living under an assumed identity. But he doesn't go quietly. He resists, fight back, assault an officer. It doesn't matter. He's taken into custody and charged with murder. A trial looms. After nearly 3 decades, Meaghan's family may finally get the answers they've been waiting for. But even now, the questions remain. If Keith is guilty, how did he do it? And more importantly, how did he get away with it for so long? For 27 years, Meaghan's family has fought for the truth. But will this trial finally bring them justice? Meaghan Louise Rose was 25 years old, a compassionate caregiver, a loving sister, a daughter full of dreams. In 1997, she left her small hometown of Morwell, Victoria, to start a new chapter in Queensland. She had a job she loved, a family who adored her, and a future she was excited about. But on the morning of July 18th, that future was stolen. The sun had barely risen when a passerby noticed an abandoned vehicle parked near the edge of the cliffs. A glass of wine sat on the ground. A trail of footprints led toward the edge, but none returned. And then a body, at the base of the cliffs, broken and lifeless, lay Meaghan. Police arrived quickly. The injuries were extensive: fractured bones, severe internal damage, consistent with fall from a great height. A toxicology report showed a blood alcohol level of 0.148, nearly 3 times the legal limit for driving. And with that, the case was closed. Suicide, they said, a tragic end to a young life. But for those who knew Meaghan, the conclusion never made sense. Fiona Ratcliffe, Meaghan's sister, had spoken to her just days before her death. She was excited about coming home to visit. She was making plans for the future. Nothing about her demeanor suggested despair. But what stood out even more were the circumstances surrounding her relationship. Keith Lees, her boyfriend, was 13 years older than Meaghan. He had been with her for years. To outsiders, their relationship seemed stable. But then, a detail emerged that would change everything. A year before Meaghan's death, Keith took out a large life insurance policy in her name. The payout? Over $200,000. But there was a clause. If Meaghan died by suicide within 13 months, the money wouldn't be paid. Meaghan died at 14 months. To Meaghan's family, this wasn't a coincidence. This was premeditated. Questions remained. If Meaghan had planned to end her life, why didn't she leave a note? Why didn't she say goodbye to her loved ones? And then there was the scene itself. The wine glass found near the cliff. Had anyone actually seen her drinking? And what about the footprints? Why was there no sign of hesitation at the edge, no disturbed gravel, no final moments of pause? It wasn't until 25 years later that detectives would look at these details again and realize that they had missed something big. For decades, Meaghan's family pleaded for authorities to take a second look. But it wasn't until 2022, when Queensland's cold case unit re-examined long-forgotten files, that the story took a shocking turn. Detectives reviewed the autopsy, the crime scene, and the financial records. What they found made them question everything. And one detail stood out, one they had overlooked for decades. Meaghan's injuries were consistent with a fall. But there was something else. Injuries that suggested a struggle. Blunt force trauma that didn't align perfectly with a simple drop from a cliff. It raised a terrifying question. Had she been pushed? By 2023, the evidence was mounting. Police had new suspicions about Keith Lees. When detectives contacted him in Victoria, they expected answers. But instead, he did something unexpected. He disappeared. His car was found abandoned near the coastline. His phone? Disconnected. He had vanished. It was a game of cat and mouse, and authorities believed he wasn't acting alone. Someone was helping him. For months, rumors swirled that religious groups had unknowingly sheltered him. And as weeks turned into months, it seemed he had escaped justice once again. But in January 2025, a breakthrough, a true crime podcast, had reignited public interest in the case. Someone listening had recognized something. A face, a name, a story that sounded too familiar. They tipped off authorities. And on a quiet street in Durrell, Sydney, police closed in. After 27 years, Keith Lees was arrested. The arrest wasn't peaceful. He resisted, assaulting an officer. But it was over. He was extradited to Queensland, charged with murder and held in custody. Now, after nearly 3 decades, a trial looms. Prosecutors will argue that Meaghan didn't fall. She was pushed. That Keith Lees orchestrated her death for money, waiting for the insurance payout period to ensure he would collect. For 27 years, he lived free while Meaghan's family suffered. But there's one final question. After all these years, will the court convict him? Meaghan's background and relationship with Keith Lees. Meaghan Louise Rose was more than just a name in a case file. She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend, born and raised in Morwell, Victoria. She had an innate kindness that led her to a career in caring for the elderly and disabled. Her work was more than just a job. It was her calling, but she was also ambitious, determined to build a future for herself. By the time she was 23, She had bought her first home, balancing 2 jobs to make it happen. She was independent, strong-willed, and full of dreams. It was around this time that she met Keith Lees. He was older, 19 years her senior, divorced with a young son. To Meaghan's family, the relationship was unexpected, but Meaghan seemed happy. When Keith suggested they move to Queensland, she agreed, seeing it as a fresh start. They settled in Marcola, near the Sunshine Coast, where she found work as an assistant nurse. It was supposed to be the next chapter of her life. Instead, it became the last. On the morning of July 18th, 1997, a hiker discovered Meaghan's body at the base of Point Cartwright Cliffs. The rocks below were jagged, the drop lethal. Police arrived quickly, and an investigation was launched. Her car was found nearby, along with a glass of wine. Her blood alcohol level? 0.148, nearly 3 times the legal limit for driving. The injuries, authorities said, were consistent with a high fall. Suicide. That was the official conclusion. And just like that, the case was closed. But for those who knew Meaghan, the ruling never made sense. She had made plans. She was supposed to visit her family in Victoria the following week. She had never shown signs of depression. And then there were the inconsistencies, the details that would only come into focus years later. From the very beginning, Meaghan's family refused to accept the official version of events. Her sister Fiona led the charge, writing to authorities, pleading for the case to be reviewed. But for years, no one listened. Every request was met with the same response. The evidence pointed to suicide. Case closed. And so, they did what they could, kept her story alive, spoke out whenever possible, and held vigils in her name. They refused to let Meaghan be forgotten. For decades, the case remained untouched. But in 2022, after persistent lobbying from Meaghan's family, the Queensland Cold Case Investigation Team agreed to take a second look. What they found would change everything. Reopening the case. When the Cold Case Unit reopened the investigation, they didn't just review what was already known. They re-examined everything from the ground up. First, the autopsy report. Meaghan had suffered multiple injuries from a fall, but there were also signs of blunt force trauma inconsistent with the drop. The placement of her car raised questions. Was it staged? And then there was a detail that had been overlooked for decades: Meaghan's life insurance policy. Detectives discovered that Keith Lees had taken out a policy on Meaghan's life in the year before her death. The payout? Over $200,000. But there was one crucial clause. The policy wouldn't pay out if Meaghan died by suicide within the first 13 months. She died at 14 months. That wasn't just suspicious. It was calculated. By late 2023, Queensland police were ready to question Keith Lees. But there was one problem. He was gone. His car was found abandoned near the coastline. His phone? Disconnected. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. For over 18 months, authorities searched for him. Rumors swirled that he had been hiding in rural Victoria, supported by religious groups unaware of his past. Each time authorities got close, he slipped away. But then a break. In January 2025, a true crime podcast revisited Meaghan's case. The renewed media attention led to an anonymous tip. Someone had seen him. He was living under an alias in Durrell, New South Wales. Within days, police moved in. After 27 years, the hunt was over. Keith Lees, now 72, was found hiding in a small home on Kenhus Road. When police arrived, he resisted, even attempting to bite officers as they placed him in handcuffs. But it was too late. His freedom was over. He was extradited to Queensland and formally charged with Meaghan's murder. For Meaghan's family, it was a moment of justice long overdue. But the fight wasn't over yet. The case was heading to trial, and the evidence, though compelling, would need to hold up in court. Would a jury see what Meaghan's family had seen all along? Would Keith Lees finally answer for what happened that night in 1997? The answers would soon come. Asterisk,